Guess who got brands talking? Brandlife.co.za.
Welcome to CWSA Today. My name is Wekyolana and you are tuned into the only radio program that is fundamentally grounded in the preserving of human rights for children, making sure they're well protected, educated about their power and their importance. And once again, I'm joined in studio by Dr. Benny Obayi, who is the Acting National Executive Officer. It's so great to have you again. So, Doctor, we've basically covered the structure of the organization. We've spoken about the pillars that make the organization what it is. It's only right that we go into unpacking CWSA national programs. And the one in particular that we're talking about today is the For Our Children Coalitions project. Yeah. Yes, can you just walk us through what is the project all about?
Okay, Child Welfare South Africa implements national programs. When we say national program, it means the program covers more than one province. So if it's just in one province, then it's not a national program.
Yes.
Now, one of the national programs we have, we'll probably discuss other ones, other dates, but one of the national programs we have is called For Our Children Coalition Project. Mm-hmm. Just like the name says, it's a project that aims at bringing different stakeholders together and to look at the issues and the challenges of sexual exploitation of children or commercial sexual exploitation of children, because it's becoming a huge problem in South Africa and in Africa. It's related or tied. It's somehow related to trafficking. Most times when children are trafficked, they end up as sex slaves or working in the sex industry, which is not supposed to be. So basically, the project is about addressing the challenge of sexual exploitation of children at a higher level. Not just at the lower level of identifying and rescuing, but this time it's looking at the bigger issues, looking at policy issues, looking at legislative issues, looking at organizational challenges, looking at where the gaps are and how to fill in the gaps so that we'll start addressing the problem.
Definitely. When did the project actually start?
The project started in 2016. We approached the donor in 2015 for the project, but it actually started February 2016.
And, I think sexual exploitation of children has been going on for ages, for such a long time. Why did you guys think it was very important that this was necessary in the time that we are in now? Because it's been an issue for the longest time.
Yes, when you look at the whole component of child protection programs, you would identify that a lot of the other areas receiving a lot of attention when you look at issues of child abuse or even the issues of sexual abuse, because there's a difference between sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. Now, those components receive a lot of attention, but sexual exploitation have not been given the type of attention it requires to start addressing the issues. What usually happens is on the news, when people hear about children rescued from brothels or from sex slave rings or from traffickers, there's comment about it and people are outraged and people blame all sorts of people for the situation, but we have not really come together to start asking ourselves why we have the problem and what we need to do. We usually like to draw a parallel between what happened in the health sector, where when the issue of HIV became a problem, people came together and singled it out to say, what is it about HIV that is a problem? Why is it a problem, and how can we start addressing it? And it was based on that they started putting frameworks and structures to start addressing HIV. And that's what we are looking at. That's what we hope to achieve. We don't want to just comment on issues of sexual exploitation of children when it happens, or or just think about how it's going to end. We want to tackle it head on and say, let's proactively start looking at the dynamics. What are the challenges? What are the issues? What are the manifestations? So that we can start looking at the solutions. We can identify the solutions to sexual exploitation.
And where do you think the solutions stem from? Who are the people that need to start upping up their either their security measures, or is it a policy issue? Is it an issue around the government? Is it an issue around families not being educated as to how to protect their kids? Who are the people that you think are really at the ground of getting the solution?
Well, there's a whole lot of component to that, and it's not just a one thing. It's not a one-dimensional thing, and there's no one clear-cut solution to the problem. But the first thing is to raise the level of awareness, to start speaking out against the issues, to start understanding the issues, and that comes with research. You have to research, understand the dynamics, get involved, find out why is this a problem. Because when you talk of sexual exploitation, it happens for so many reasons. Over time, people have only attributed it to poverty, and people have only said it could only happen to children from poor homes. But current observations and research shows that it could happen to anyone. It could happen to anyone's child. Sometimes children get involved in commercial sexual activities for different reasons, not just for monetary gains. So one needs to understand the dynamics in order to understand how to start solving the problem. And like I said, unlike sexual abuse, it's completely different because sexual abuse, sometimes it's a case of someone who's taking advantage of, who's probably overpowering the child. But when you start talking of sexual exploitation, it's completely different, because sometimes there's a case of people tell you the person willingly accepted. Like when you talk of child marriage, for instance, which is part of sexual exploitation, there's often the argument of, okay, it's our cultural practice, or the child consented or agreed to it. Most times, if you when you listen to people that are rescued from brothels, they often say, oh, the children came here willingly on their own, they agreed. So the dynamic is different. So one needs to understand it first in order to understand ways to start addressing the problem.
Definitely. And I wonder if child pornography is also part of sexual exploitation.
Yes. Child pornography is part of sexual exploitation, and it follows the same pattern, and sometimes people do not see the harm in it, because they say it's just a child sending nude picture of themselves, but somebody's using it for money, somebody's using it for personal gains, and the psychological damage it does to the child in the future, you can't measure it. And that's also where there's a gap, because sometimes when someone when a legal practitioner is looking at a material with where a child is sexually abused, online or electronically, to them they don't see any harm, because they just see a child who is asked to remove their clothes, or for them they don't think that it's harmful, but they don't understand the psychological implication for the child.
I wonder, doctor, because I'm just thinking, there's obviously the side of the child being sexually exploited, but there's also the side of the consumer. Right, there's someone who's actually actively looking for that kind of material, or wants to see a child or a young person, doing some sort of sexual activity for money. What does that say about us as humans, as Africans, as South Africans, more especially? What problem or what issue do these consumers, whoever they are, sort of have, and is that being addressed?
Well, I don't think it's limited to South Africa. Now, when you start talking of sexual exploitation online, you actually realize that a material produced probably in a small town of Grahamstown is being demanded by, or it's going to be used somewhere in Europe or in Asia or other parts of the continent. So from the demand side, it's not only limited to South Africa, but it's part of what we actually hope to achieve through this project. We are conducting a study, and part of it is to understand what drives the demand. Why is the demand? Why is there so much demand for for children, for sexual purposes? Why is there demand for older people, like we mentioned, child bride? Why is there a demand for it? Why is there demand for materials online with children exposed? Why is there a demand for people looking for younger girls to exploit in brothels? We had a conference not long ago, and it focused on just one component of sexual exploitation of children, which is exploitation in travel and tourism, because it's one of the areas that it's aiding the growth of sexual exploitation of children. And that is because we're beginning to see a lot of middle class people, middle class growing in Africa, and people now have disposable income, and companies send their people that work for them on business trips, and when they go out of town, sometimes they ask, obviously before now, people would always ask, would request to be satisfied sexually. But now there's, the growing demand for younger girls, by travelers and tourists. And because they feel they're away from where they cannot easily be identified, it becomes possible and easy for them to do whatever they like and get away with it. And one of the things that has been identified is because some people believe they are easy and cheaper options, so they might not make as much demand as the adult sex workers. So that's just one of the reasons that has been given. But through our study, we would like to find out what is pushing the demand. Why is there so much demand?
Definitely. And I think we're going to come back to the conference you just had and the study a little bit after the break.
brandlive.co.za. You're listening to brandlive.co.za, an industry first in the world of internet radio. Not only are we an internet radio station, we are an internet radio platform for your brand. So why not expose your brand to potentially thousands of listeners and improve your customer relationships and brand equity with podcasts and live broadcasts? Be sure to check brandlive.co.za for more information. brandlive.co.za, harnessing the power of internet radio.
You're back on CWSA today, your one-stop shop for all things that are affiliated with human rights of children and making sure that we protect them and we preserve them. Of course, I'm speaking to Dr. Benny Obayi, and we were talking a little bit before the break about this amazing study that was sort of the root or the grounding root of the regional conference that you just recently had on sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism. Let's talk about the conference. Let's talk about how it was, the outcomes, the discussions, the countries that were there, and sort of everything that made it what it was.
We had a conference in June, and the conference focused on understanding sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism. That it's a follow-up to a study conducted by ECPACT International, and the study was launched in 2016, May 2016, and the South African component was launched in Stellenbosch, but it's a global study. It involved different countries, but it looked specifically at how sexual exploitation of children is a problem globally, not just within a specific area, but globally. And because South Africa and Africa is increasingly becoming destination of choice for travelers and tourists, it's also creating a problem for children because tourists are beginning to take advantage of what they find in places where they visit or where they travel to. And that was what the study looked into. And after the study was launched last year, and there were a set of recommendations, and that included bringing stakeholders together to address, to start looking at the issues and how to address them. So we then, from South African side, started putting together to bring together different stakeholders. And because it's not just a country-specific problem, we had to look regionally. We had to look at East Africa and Southern Africa, because tourism is actually thriving in both regions. A lot of the East African countries growing, and just like West and Northern African countries. And we thought, let's bring the stakeholders from those countries together to have a discussion. It's just the beginning of the process, to have a discussion, to start looking at what is the problem and how can we solve the problem. So we're able to get the Secretary of Tourism from Kenya, and the Deputy Minister of Tourism from Zimbabwe, and we also had the Director General of Tourism of South Africa at the conference. And then we had delegates from the ECPAC countries in Africa. We had about 7 to 8 countries represented at the conference.
Wow.
And basically the conference looked at just a follow-up to the study, and what is the problem? Why do we have the problem of sexual exploitation in travel and tourism? And it came up with set of resolutions on how the conference think the problem can be addressed. And the resolution focused mostly on creating awareness, increasing the level of awareness among countries, getting more buy-in from government agencies. One of the recommendation was that addressing sexual exploitation of children should not just be the responsibility of one agency of government. In most countries, you find out that it's only given to one agency to deal with, and usually it's like in South Africa, the Department of Social Development. In other countries, you find Department of Women and Children's Affairs and so on. But we say it's a problem that cuts across all sectors. So the recommendation from the conference was that there should be a desk in all government departments, like what you had with HIV, where there was a HIV desk in all government departments, from health to finance to communication to social development. They all had a HIV desk, so that everyone could take ownership and start looking at how each agency is going to make budget provision for, to address HIV. So those were the kind of recommendation that came from the conference, that all government departments should have a desk for CSEC, which is commercial sexual exploitation of children, and should start setting aside a budget on how they are going to address it. It could be a case of creating awareness within the government sector. It could be a case of what they will do proactively, because, as I mentioned, it's not just something that social development can do alone. There's a component for education, finance, communication, tourism, all the different agencies. So the first level from what came out of the conference is that the first level is to have a high stakeholder engagement to get the government agencies to start buying into the process, to say, let's not just trivialize the issue and leave it alone for one government agency to deal with. Let's recognize it as a problem for all government agencies to deal with, and start increasing budget provision for it, instead increasing funding to for programs to address the problem.
Definitely. And I found it so interesting that you linked this industry of tourism, because in one end, people are just thinking we're getting jobs, we're getting people into the country, but we're not thinking about the negatives that come with everything that with the economy growing. So it'd be interesting to find out what an ordinary person can learn from this study. Is it completed? Is it finished? And how that can relate to them understanding that even though they are, contributing to a specific sector, they have a responsibility to fight this issue.
Yes, that one, the one that launched last year, it's completed already,
Okay.
but we started another one this year.
All right.
It's a different study entirely,
Wow.
and the whole idea of the study is to understand the dynamics, to understand the incidence and the prevalence of sexual exploitation of children, how
Yes.
it manifests, what are the factors that drive the increase of sexual exploitation of children. We started the study this year, and is a partnership with UNISA, and it's going to go on for a bit. And we're hoping that a component of the study will be finished soon, and would launch that and then continue discussions around the outcomes of the study.
Yes.
Basically, what the study hopes, one of the things the study is looking at is engaging with survivors
Yes.
and victims in order to understand, to be able to tell their stories, to understand what happened and how it happens, and how to start addressing the problem, and also engaging with some of the key stakeholders, like brothel owners and the different people that might be involved in the process, just to have a better and a clear understanding. And what would be the take for an ordinary person is that it would provide a clearer understanding. It would help us understand what the issues are,
Yes.
so we can better educate an average person to say, this is what to look out for, these are the issues, these are the challenges, and these are the things that parents, communities, and everyone can do.
Definitely. I think you started an amazing thing with the conference. Tell me, are we going to be seeing more of it? Are we going to see more events around sexual exploitation and finding more solutions around the issue? What is next after the study and after, the actual conference?
Yes, there's going to be a lot of it, and basically the project is about bringing different stakeholders together, is about bringing different key players together. So there's going to be a lot of such conferences. We're planning to have another one for children by the end of the year.
Yes.
We had one last year, but it's going to be a follow-up, where the children will be discussing the outcome of this conference,
Yes.
so that we'll also get their own perspective in the issues and the challenges of the children. And there's going to be other series of conferences. Now, some people do not understand the relevance of such meetings or such conferences, but it's actually a way of bringing high-level people to start understanding the issues, so that they can start prioritizing them. They
I
can
agree.
start making commitments.
Yes.
Now, when the ministers came for the conference, it renewed their commitment, and they said, you know what, we're going to go back and we'll call a meeting and start discussing this. Usually that's what such conferences aim to achieve. People think that when you have a lot of conferences, it's just where people come to talk. But what people don't realize is that a lot of people outside of the sector do not understand what happens. So a one-day conference is usually a great opportunity for someone like in the financial sector who has no idea what you're talking about,
I agree.
in social problems. It gives them a great opportunity to sit in a conference, hear the discussions, hear the experts speak about it, and then they can have a renewed mindset towards the issue, and they can start thinking of how they're going to address the problem. And we always like to draw a parallel from the health sector. Before, they were, high level of discussions and engagement on health issues, people knew little. And the private sector, the business sector, they couldn't commit because they didn't understand. But when they attended the conferences, when they were made part of the discussion and deliberation, there became a lot of commitment from the private sector supporting health-related issues. Yes. So that's why the project at this point, it's about high-level discussions on why we should take it as a big you should look at it as a big area of concern, so that we can start having commitment from the people that can influence things. Because if you don't get the business and the government to support an initiative, whatever you are doing at the grassroots level wouldn't make a lot of impact. People would just continue to complain. But when we get the business sectors involved, when we get the government involved, then it will change the whole dynamic of how everyone looks at the issue, because you would get support, you get funding, and everyone would make it a priority.
Definitely. And that was Dr. Benny Obai talking about the For Our Children Coalitions project, which I think is such an amazing project. I think more noise needs to be around this issue, and more collaboration between government, as he said, and businesses. And we need to make sure that we are behind this idea, because it's bigger than just one conference. It's an entire ideology and the way you think and the way you are in the world. And that concludes our show for the day. CWSA Today, every single Monday from 11 to 11:30. Do not miss it. It was amazing, Doctor. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Lovely. And that concludes our show.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za.
Have you ever thought about the power of social media? Social media has the power to make your business grow. Yeah. Why don't you let us manage your social media? Because our business is to see your business grow. Visit us at www.bstownmedia.co.za.